the question of, is this data right? Is it accurate? Is it high quality? Becomes the hill that everyone dies on.
Welcome to Unlocking Big Data, a series about getting trusted data to healthcare professionals, presented by HIMSS. HIMSS Market Insights conducted research on data analytics platforms in December 2022 to early January 2023 to understand satisfaction with current analytics platforms or solutions, integration of applications and technologies with data analytics platforms, challenges encountered with investments in analytic platforms and upgrades, and reliability and use of analytics data. 55 executives, IT, technology, and clinicians participated in the research. Throughout the series, we'll present key data points from the research and focus on why these data points are important and how you can leverage these findings to support your healthcare organization's data initiatives. In our first episode, we'll look at data analytics platforms and integrated tools. I'm joined by Andrew Sorenson, Regional Vice President, Data and Digital Product Strategy and Governance at Centene Corp, and Michael Meucci, CEO of Arcadia, who will help us examine key takeaways from the research. Welcome, Andrew and Michael.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
While 93% of respondents agree that access to quality data is critical to their organization's performance, it's easier said than done. What's the very first step that healthcare organizations need to make once their leaders have collectively come to that agreement?
I think one thing that's really important is to try and figure out the size and scale of opportunities that you have in front of you as a company. Once you realize and have a sense for the investments that you need to make and the outcome of what those investments may yield, it'll help you understand how much you can invest in order to capture those data and analytics opportunities. I think that that's probably the first thing.
I think it's really wise. Boiling the ocean when it comes to data could be a real failure to launch moment. When you think about the types of data that large and mid-sized organizations have, they have structured clinical data, they have imaging data, they have lab and exogenous data sets. They've got data from their ERP. Start with a focused domain and expand from there versus trying to tackle all of your data problems at once. I also think from a governance perspective, it's really important to answer the question of what quality means. Data in healthcare is imperfect, and as part of the change management process to get individuals using data, being able to define quality data means this is an important question, because I've seen organizations, I've lived these experiences where the question of, is this data right? Is it accurate? Is it high quality? Becomes the hill that everyone dies on when the majority of the data is fine used and you're chasing down the edge case.
Right.
The other thing that I'd add probably as a fast follow is you want to find the right team. If you don't have the right leader, I think it'll be hard to amass a coalition of the willing, so to speak, in order to make some of the changes that you need to make as an organization in order to really leverage data and analytics.
I think that's really excellent. It's interesting when I look at our customer base, those organizations who have invested in teams and enablement of those teams. This is a really fast changing sector. There's new technologies released seemingly every day. Finding a team that can both understand the technology that's used by the organization and the technology evolution is really critical, because you want your team to feel empowered to draw as much from the data that is brought together as they can. Organizations that don't have that investment or rely just on a vendor are oftentimes much less successful.
So for larger organizations, defined as those having 15,000 plus employees, let's say, they're ahead of the curve when it comes to integrating various tools and applications such as clinical decision support tools, communications platforms, and pop health management technologies. How can the smaller to mid-sized organizations level the playing field when deploying more technologies atop their data analytics platform?
It's interesting. Andrew and I were talking about this today, and I made the observation that I don't often think about the number of employees that work for organizations, but I think as you look at the maturity curve, I kind of go back to the first response, which is you don't have to boil the ocean here. Every organization at this point has an electronic health record, and every EHR platform is offering some sort of data solution. It may not be what you need for the long term, but it might be great for getting started if you haven't started. And so I think that a big part of getting started is doing a vendor landscape assessment of who are the partners that you already work with. Do you have a solution through your EMR? Do you work with a GPO that has a solution? Do you have access to data analytics capabilities through other technology partnerships with your cloud hosting provider, whether it's GCP, Azure, or AWS? where do you have certain capabilities you can start testing and learning from without having to go and drive like a massive implementation, a massive transformation?
I think prioritization for analytics is incredibly important for any sized organization. But one thing that I've seen that smaller organizations that are high performing in this area do particularly well is they become laser focused on the things that are going to deliver the most value to their organization from an analytics perspective. They also find ways to get a lot from a little in terms of the investments that they're making. And so they'll build a tool that can satisfy a bunch of different use cases. But sometimes that scarcity breeds discipline, and they just get very, very good at making the small investments that are going to go a long way. And I think if organizations that are a little bit smaller can pursue that, they'll be more successful than if they don't.
That's an excellent point. You bring up when resources are more scarce, planning is even more critical. So being able to say success means X and having a pathway of how do you achieve X is really critical. And I think large organizations do this equally well. But as you're thinking about the journey, if you're a smaller or a mid-sized organization, making sure you understand what goal you're driving to. A race without a finish line is just pointless.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the C-suite leaders are more likely to have plans to implement AI and ML, within the next year in particular. What is the driver behind that trend for the guys at the top?
That's a really great question. When I think about really senior executives that I've worked with, it seems like they have a little bit different vantage point than maybe frontline employees. The time horizon that they're thinking about is much longer. And I think that they get more plugged into some of the macro trends and things that are happening in other industries. It's just the nature of their job to interact with executives that are doing different things than maybe they are as they build their networks. And so I think that they get more exposure to how analytics can work in other industries. And as they're thinking about the transformation maybe that their organization needs, they're thinking 5 or 6 years in advance. And so my sense is that leads them to see the way that analytics isn't just making organizations more efficient, but it's completely transforming the nature of competition for a lot of companies. And introducing new business models into their own businesses. And I think that the best executives are thinking about things like that. They're always looking that far into the future and trying to find ways to differentiate their organizations.
I think the point around vantage point is so critical, and it's probably the major driver of the response to that question. If you think about a nurse at a mid-sized hospital or even a large facility, he or she is probably not thinking about operating margin or operating loss. The executive suite of every hospital system in the United States today is thinking about how to manage cash and operations, because we're in an unprecedented labor market where hospital operating budgets are just being turned on their heads. You've got some of the largest systems in the country posting huge losses and still providing great care. And so I think you have a number of executive leaders who are thinking about how does technology help us to transform and drive to better sustainability. It goes without saying that we can't have a healthcare system in the current construct in the United States where the biggest hospitals are losing money year on year on year. Even with the reserves that some of these large hospitals have, at some point that becomes very unsustainable. AI and ML have the capability of driving a much more efficient workforce where folks are able to work to the top of their license. And I'm not just talking a medical license or a care delivery license, but everyone's license, an analytics person being able to provide the most value from the outputs that they have, an executive having the right inputs to be the most effective in his or her role. And so I think that that's a big driver of the thirst to implement new AI and ML. And then I think there's a secondary motivator, which is it's sexy. You start to think about what people are gravitating to. If you have the choice between two providers and one says, I'm a great provider, I've been in the industry for X number of years, yes, I have an electronic medical record, or you have a provider who says, yeah, I've been practicing the same amount of time. I not only have an electronic medical record, I've got a digital front door so you can schedule your own appointments, request medication refills. I use digital diagnostics so I get an automated second opinion. Like, that's attractive to a consumer, and consumerism is rising, and there's a lot of competition for healthcare consumers. So there's a retention, there's a new customer acquisition angle to this that I think a lot of healthcare executives are considering.
Interesting. Well, that is all we have time for today. I'd like to thank our guests, Andrew Sorenson and Michael Meucci, for their perspectives. And be sure to check out the other episodes in this series, as well as our companion podcast. For HIMSS, this is Michael Krieger.